Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. Go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And it's time for SEC After Dark with Steven Lassan, our good friend over at Athlon Sports. Goes by Athlon Steven on a Twitter machine. Steven, how you doing, buddy?
Mike, I'm doing great. It's that time of the week, my favorite time of the week, SEC After Dark. It's always good to be talking with you and all the cousins here on the show as we I guess we're kind of slogging our way through the off season, but at the same time, I think we've got plenty of like great stuff to come tonight and through the next couple weeks. So I don't really think there's much of an off season anymore. So that's kind of cool, right? We get to talk about like the video game come, in a few weeks. So that's always good.
Oh yeah. Video game news is popping. Seems like the sport is crumbling upon itself in some people's eyes. But again, I don't focus on that nonsense. I focus on the games. That's what we love to talk about. And once again, Steven, I have to thank you for coming through with an outstanding show topic. Not only show topic, but basically you've provided all the content via the anonymous coach comments from the upcoming Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine. My favorite part of the whole magazine. Steven, any comments, anything you want to get rolling before we get going here? And what's the latest on the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine and how the listeners can get in and get their own copy?
Yeah, so first of all, the Athlon Sports magazine is going to hit newsstands on June 4th. As we talked about earlier this offseason, there are 2 SEC covers. We got 9 teams featured on those 2 covers. One has Alabama, LSU, Georgia, and I'm kind of forgetting all these as I go. My head tried to separate the 2 divisions, but the other one's more of a Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Missouri cover. So June 4th on newsstands, that's grocery stores, bookstores, and you can also get it at athlonsports.com. We should have that link up at any moment for pre-orders or orders. So the fact they're not on our site yet means they probably aren't shipping out yet. It could literally be any day. So keep checking athlonsports.com in the newsstand. And that should say that Mike, that June 4th date is a little ambiguous because some places will get it earlier and they'll put it out earlier. Some places will get it later and it'll come out later. So it may get somewhere by Friday or Saturday if you're out shopping. And so
nice. And I'll put it, as soon as we have that link, I can add it to the show notes so that everybody can get their copy of the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine. But, Steven, we got our first donation from cousin Steven. Is this you, Steven? I don't think it is. It's a MIZ fan. MIZ, love you guys. Review Oklahoma last. He gave us $5. So if an Oklahoma fan wants to bump the Sooners up, just give us more than $5 and we'll move you all up. So
it's like the Price is Right with like $1, Bob,
Exactly. I don't frown on a dollar, I'll tell you that. So, again, we're going to go in alphabetical except Oklahoma last, apparently, unless someone gives us a donation. If you want your team kicked up to the top of the list, throw us a donation. So, again, this is the anonymous coach comments from the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine. And we were just talking, looks like we're going to do Oklahoma first because old Shoelace gave us $50. Oh, my good. Mid-poo last. So we're doing Mizzou last now. Thanks. Unless someone wants to give us $51. But, man, that's incredible. But, Steven, before we get rolling here on these coach comments, will you please let the audience know this is not necessarily you and I's opinion. Can you explain maybe, we don't want to give too much away about how where these comments are coming from, but what you can share, all that before we dive into it.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that because I think the process is kind of interesting for these. So it's completely anonymous. I don't even know who the coach is. It could be a head coach. It could be a coordinator. It could be an assistant coach. And, we ask as many assistants as we can get throughout the offseason. You get a pretty good sampling of coaches from all 16 teams in the league. I think what's interesting is you do see some themes throughout this, scouting process. A lot of coaches have some of the similar comments about certain teams, but we at times will offer our questions to one of our writers who reaches out to the coaching staffs across the league to get this information. We've asked questions. A lot of these times, can be as just as basic as going to a coach and saying, scout Missouri for me. And we give them that level of kind of anonymous, putting the anonymous curtain up, because as you guys know, during the season, no coach wants to give bulletin board material for the other team for the most part. The objective is to say as little as possible. So what we're hoping by doing this in the magazine is it is unfiltered. It's their chance to take shots. It's their chance to tell the truth and to give us kind of a behind the scenes scouting report of all 16 teams. I don't necessarily agree with some of the scouting, and some things we'll get into that's kind of interesting. But hey, this comes from coaches in the SEC, so we're getting kind of on the ground intel about some of these teams, and I find it really fascinating.
Yeah, no doubt. And real quick, Stephen, cousin Jonathan wants to know: will they ship these magazines internationally?
That is a good question. We have a new supplier this year, so I will check. If you don't mind, shoot me an email, StephenLCFB@gmail.com. Send me your email address and I'll check for you this week.
All right, perfect. All right, let's get on with the show. And again, we're doing Oklahoma first. Thanks, old Shoelace there. Really appreciate you. And the way these broke down, we have 2 graphics. I spent hours doing this, so hopefully you guys appreciate this. But we're going to do one at a time and just kind of read them off for people that are just listening back later. And then I say we weigh in one at a time, so we don't want to overload anybody. But we're starting again with the Oklahoma Sooners. This is the anonymous coach comments about the Oklahoma Sooners. I'll read it off here, Stephen. They're starting to round out on defense to a unit you'd expect Brent Venables to be coaching at Clemson. That's the good news entering the SEC. The bad news is that they could be bad on the O-line if they can't pull some guys together late in the portal. Now, again, I don't know when this exact comment was taken. Oklahoma has added some guys to the portal, but maybe you could even argue that he's not. You don't just add bodies on the offensive line and they excel. You got to add the right pieces too. So I think you can make that statement, but this goes in line with some of the things I'm hearing, Stephen. I don't know about you when it comes to Oklahoma and the defense, and I anticipate that they could have a top 4, maybe even a top 3 defense in the SEC in their debut season. What would be your takeaway about Oklahoma being that good on the defensive side of the ball year 1 in the SEC?
Yeah, I really think that this coach kind of nailed it about Oklahoma. When you look at Oklahoma in 2022, gave up around 30 points a game. They cut that total by about a touchdown last season. So you can already start to see the progression and improvement of this defense just on the basic kind of accounting stats for college football. So I think not surprising that it took Brent Venables a year to sort of find his footing. But I think as you go into the SEC, I think the one thing that gives me a lot of confidence about Oklahoma, and just thinking about Lincoln Riley over at USC and the struggles they're having on the offensive and defensive lines, I think Brent Venables gets that the line of scrimmage really matters in this league more than any other. And you heard him kind of talk at SEC meetings about the margin of error, trying to find ways to win on the margins. You just look at the recruiting in the SEC. I mean, 10 teams have averaged a finish in the top 25 classes of college football in the SEC over the last 5 years. Take out Oklahoma and Texas in the Big 12. None of those teams have finished an average in the top 25. So the margin for error is pretty small, but I think you start to look at what this team can be this year. And I really like this defense. 6 starters back, Danny Stutzman, one of my preseason first team All-Americans. But the biggest question mark is going to be that offensive line. And even though Branson Hickman was a late pickup, it's still a group that's probably going to take some time to gel, especially when you see they get Tennessee, Auburn, and Texas early in the season. So I think kind of nailed it there for me on Oklahoma. It's kind of echoing what I feel about the Sooners.
All right, Steven. So let's get into, again, we got 2 graphics like this for every team. So let's get into the second part for the Sooners here, Stephen. And again, this is the anonymous coach section from the Athlon Sports upcoming college football preview magazine. Oklahoma is a legit top program, but the secret to the SEC is the line play, and they won't be able to do what they want on offense if they can't protect against an average defensive line in this league. And obviously, they're talking SEC. If you're looking for a new offense, it won't be drastically different from Jeff Lebby's offense last year, but they've got to run the ball more efficiently than they did when he was there. Seth Luttrell, the new offensive coordinator, is a made-to-order kind of OC, a really experienced guy who is going to scheme to fit. And a couple of, I mean, this is not news to Oklahoma people, certainly, but for the rest of the SEC, you should know Seth Luttrell. He was on staff last year as an analyst. He played at Oklahoma. He played with Josh Heupel when I believe he was on the team when they won the national championship. So this is a Sooner through and through, and this kind of echoes what I've been hearing as well. They're not going to reinvent the wheel really on either side of the ball, even though they're having two new coordinators on that side of the ball. But this will be fascinating, Stephen, because we're all looking at the offensive line, we're looking at the defense, but I really think Oklahoma's got weapons to really, really challenge SEC defenses. And I think of all the things people are talking about Oklahoma, I don't think they're talking enough about the weapons, which obviously the success of a new coordinator is going to be dictated by the playmakers you got around him, with obviously Jackson Arnold being the star of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, I think, Mike, you and I would agree. I think we really like Jackson Arnold as a breakout candidate this year. I think he's one of the top 5 to 6 breakout quarterbacks in college football. And, they could have kept Dylan Gabriel and probably been fine, but I think there's a lot more upside potentially with Jackson Arnold as you get later into the season and beyond. And I think probably the most underrated group in all this is the Oklahoma receiving core. I've got it rated as a top 10 receiving core, but I don't think it's getting enough love this preseason. It starts with Nick Anderson. You got Jalil Farouk. Andro Anthony was off to a great start last season before he got hurt. And oh, by the way, they added Deion Burks, one of our top 30 transfers for this season. So this receiving core for Oklahoma is loaded. I am really interested to see what Gavin Sawchuk gives Oklahoma on the ground game, because he finished strong. 5 straight 100-yard games to close last season. He was banged up at the start of the year, but if they can get him healthy for a full year and that offensive line eventually kind of settles in, there's really a path there, I think, for this Oklahoma offense to take off. Should note, Seth Luttrell was the head coach at North Texas a few years ago. Scoring points and offenses was not a problem. They could play any defense, but he was a very good offensive-minded head coach. So I think Oklahoma's offense is in good shape.
Well, good news is he won't have a hand in the defense. Right. You know what?
Yeah, for sure.
And again, I think what Lane Kiffin's doing at Ole Miss is working. What Heupel's doing at Tennessee is working. I think Jeff Lebby will turn over Mississippi State's offense overnight, essentially. But the one critique you could put on all those guys and anyone, not just those guys, but the system that they're running, you wear your defense out. Yeah. With the tempo and the pace. So I would anticipate, too, that Oklahoma's defense will see fewer snaps, which is going to lead to a more productive unit as well. That can't be overlooked either. You know what?
Yeah, especially, I hate to kind of go back to the point, but in the SEC, trying to face fewer snaps as you try to get your depth and try to get your 85 to where you want it in such a big transition year. But, like I said, I think Bill Benbaugh is one of the best offensive line coaches in college football. I think this group will improve over time, but I think the opposing coaches are looking at this group very skeptically as we go into 2024, which gives Oklahoma a lot of, bulletin board material to try to exceed all of our expectations and hit that over in the 7.5 win total.
Yep. All right. Again, I don't see any donations. So until anyone gives us any donation whatsoever, we're just going to keep going in alphabetical. So let's go Alabama, Stephen, with, you all know, no Nick Saban anymore. So what are they saying about Alabama in the anonymous coach section? The biggest win was keeping quarterback Jalen Milroe around. That was a no-brainer for him after watching what that staff was able to get out of Michael Penix Jr., who was just a top 10 NFL draft pick. This is still a very talented conference title caliber roster. There are some big questions like offensive line, but they're not just going to fall off the face of the earth. The question is, if they have a bump, how patient is that fan base? And Stephen, let me just tell you, the answer is none at all.
Right.
We go 8-4. This man's on the hottest seat in America. Any worse than that, he may not survive to see year 2. Patience is not something that is going to be given in spades down in Tuscaloosa.
100%, Mike. Kalen DeBoer has the very, very impossible task of replacing the best coach in college football history. And so I think as highly as I think of Kalen DeBoer, it is still impossible to replicate what they did. There's going to be some sort of minor, I think, step back in some areas, and it's going to take some time, I think, to find a footing. But I think it's funny to think about where Alabama was under Nick Saban. When I would do a preseason top 25, I would just assume that they would be somewhere in the top 3. Now I don't think you can assume that this going into the year. There's just a little bit more unknown about this team. But I think, kind of as the coach scouting hints at there are some questions, but at the same time, it is very talented. And one of the biggest reasons has to be Jalen Milroe. Like if he takes that next step under Kalen DeBoer, and we saw what they did at Washington last season, that can make up for a lot of question marks this season.
Yep. All right. So let's get into, again, we got 2, Stephen. This took forever. So again, I hope you guys appreciate it. We got 2 graphics for every team here. Here's the second one. Anonymous coach comments for Alabama. The biggest talk right now is about the end of the Alabama discount, where guys wouldn't jump into the portal or wouldn't push for more NIL because the Nick Saban track record for NFL development was so good. That's not there anymore. So they've got to get organized. There's so much change that it's hard to know how to scout them right now. And, that is also interesting, Stephen. I mean, both those things are interesting. It's something we've talked about, and I think it's clear as day when you see someone like a Caleb Downs leave to go to Ohio State. If Nick Saban was there, he'd still be there. I mean, this is not groundbreaking stuff, but we're already starting to see some of the players kind of ditch. And back to the last comment, maybe they are getting a little bit of bump with Jalen Milroe because we've seen what DeBoer can do. So you could split it both ways, but I think that's an interesting comment. And again, if Alabama is not elite next year and they don't send a ton of guys to the NFL like they always did under Nick Saban, this is going to hurt worse and worse each year. And you see it there. They're saying, well, heck, this is a championship caliber roster. Well, it may not be in 3 or 4 years. And if it's not, this man, we got his photo up. It's going to be his problem. He's the one that did it. But again, that's kind of all negative. The last point I was also going to make there, Stephen, there's so much change, it's hard to scout them. That could be a bonus. And let's pull up Alabama's schedule again. We've all got that Georgia game circled. Now, I don't think at this level of college football, maybe the first 2 weeks, but not the third week. You can't just play vanilla and break out all this stuff against Georgia. But there is somewhat of an advantage, I would think, that Wisconsin and Georgia may be very unfamiliar with what DeBoer's want to run there at Alabama. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you read my mind, Mike. I think the scouting and plus the schedule sort of breaks in a way that maybe we won't see the true Alabama offense until we get to week 3 when Alabama is playing at Wisconsin, or even week 5 when they play Georgia, because they also have the off week before playing Georgia, which is huge for that kind of a magnitude of that game. So you could even see a team that's kind of stacking things offensively until you get to that September 28th game. And I also think on the other comment too, I heard good things about what Kalen DeBoer was doing at Washington as far as NIL and working with the collective. So I think he's kind of maybe the right coach for the moment to sort of get everybody on the same page as far as building that NIL structure, building that structure to retain players and also to go out and get those guys in the freshman ranks. I think he's off to a pretty good start so far as recruiting. So I think some confidence is certainly there. I think the question will be, of course, it's a long season. How does it hold up? Alabama's used to signing the 1 or 2 class. If they slip to 5 or 6, what their action might be. So long way to go, but I feel pretty good about the start for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama.
And Cousin Shane is in the chat. Stephen, he says, I think the bald co-host is sexy. Anonymous listener here. So early runaway for comment of the show so far. And then shout out Stink stink ass cat. $10. I'll say your name. I don't care. But for $10, love the show. New Oklahoma subscriber. You and Mike do an excellent job. Boomer. So we appreciate you, brother. But any other, I'm not seeing any other donations to get the teams rolling. So let's get into them Arkansas Razorbacks, Stephen. Some good stuff, as you would anticipate from the anonymous coaches. There's a lot of discussion down there. So let's kick it over to this first one. Apologies. All right, so this is, again, Athlon Sports College Football Anonymous Coach sections here on Arkansas Razorbacks. This is the hot seat job for the SEC heading into the season. Sam Pittman is such a well-respected guy across the industry. You really feel bad for him having a guy like offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino, who the fans and the boosters probably think should be the head coach, and coming in underneath him. So that's the SEC right there. And, man, what a comment. Hit the nail on the head. Bobby Petrino, we can't do this damn show, Stephen, without 5 people, whenever we talk Arkansas, saying, how many games before Bobby Petrino takes over? Is it going to be this game? Is it going to be that game? You know what I mean? This is out there. I don't think Bobby Petrino will be the head coach ever again, not in the SEC. But it is interesting that, these comments that are out there. And, I can tell you from behind the scenes, Sam Pittman is far and away, I think, the most beloved SEC coach out there. But, this is a fascinating comment, isn't it?
It really is. How many times do you think Bobby Petrino reminds Hunter Yurachek that he was the head coach there at some point? He's probably like, what's the over-under? Like once a day, like once a week? I don't know. But I think that this quote really kind of sums up pretty accurately the situation for Arkansas coming into the season. Sam Pittman's clearly on the hot seat. I think as far as just well-liked coaches, he probably would rank number 1 in all of our power rankings there. But I also think desperation makes coaches do funny things. And Sam Pittman's pretty desperate right now and to improve the offense. And you look around, like, who could you go and get? Because you have to be able to kind of guarantee a coach a contract, and you're probably not going to be able to get a rising star, because what if you do get fired and you only can sign him to a 1-year deal? What does that mean? There's a lot of factors to that. And so Petrino kind of fits the moment, as crazy as this sounds. He's got a track record.
SEC. We got one more. It looks like we got a donation too. So shout out cousin Joshua, $5, and he's a Mizzou man. So I know we were trolling them earlier, but we'll get to them next. But we got one more here for Arkansas. So let's hit the second portion here, Stephen. And again, Bobby Petrino is taking over the comment section here. If Bobby Petrino can get the quarterback I was just talking about, Taylor Green, if they can get him ready, they might have a shot at a 500 year. But they have a shaky situation with their offensive line losses in the spring. Is 500 enough to keep Sam? That's an interesting question right there. The defensive line is the best unit probably, but they just don't have the overall defensive talent right now to compete in this league. And yeah, I think that is fair to say, particularly about the defense is what I'm referencing. But you got to recall, and I don't know where the truth lies here, Stephen, but this is something that I've discussed several times when it comes to Arkansas. I thought last year with Travis Williams, that was a little bit of a, I don't want to say unknown, because he's had success as a defensive coordinator, but I didn't know how good of a hire that would be. And Arkansas defense basically did a complete 180. They were very competitive. early in the season. Now, late in the season, they kind of cratered, I think is the best way to say it. But is that because the offense was giving them nothing and they were just outmanned and they just, I don't know. We don't know the answer to that. But if we can get that first half defense, we get the offense rolling, I think we might be cooking here. So I don't know if these comments on the defense are completely fair, other than saying they got a really good defensive line. And if you got a good defensive line in this league, you got an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think Landon Jackson is probably one of the league's more underrated players. I think Arkansas fans know how good he is. I don't know that he's necessarily as widely known outside the SEC as maybe he should be, considering how good he was last season. In theory, he could probably take another step forward this year. So I think Travis Williams, to your point, did a really nice job with this defense. I mean, you look at October, in just games in October last season, Arkansas was only giving up around 19 points a game. Now, in the month of November, it got a lot worse. I don't know if we should share these numbers, but it was closer to about 38. So things definitely cratered in the wrong direction after a pretty solid start to the season. So, and I like what they did in the portal to build depth. But I think the ultimate kind of X factor for Arkansas is really that offensive line. Taylon Green's mobility will help. How far does this offensive line make a step forward? Because I think everywhere else, I think Arkansas's got a really good shot to kind of, as the coach scouting said, kind of get to 6 wins.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to get into Missouri. Thanks to Justin there with the donation. So let's get into the first. And I got to be honest with you, Steven, I was stunned because most of these coach comments are, they're like, I don't want to say shots, but they're commentary on the coaching staff. And this was the one where if there was one coach I thought people were going to go in on, was Drink. And we don't have it. So again, these are good comments, but they're not quite what I expected. Let's start with this one on Brady Cook, Stephen. And again, this is the Athlon Sports anonymous coach comments on Missouri. They'll go as far as quarterback Brady Cook can take him. If they can keep him healthy, they could repeat what they did last year. That's music to the ears of Mizzou fans. I think a lot of their staffs, I think a lot of other staffs are expecting them to slump just because who they are, but give them credit. They'll put together a really talented team. And what I think, Stephen, could be one of the best offenses in the entire SEC, if not the country, with what they have coming back. I believe 100% of the receiving is back. Now, of course, they lose Cody Schrader. We'll get to that. But Brady Cook's back, bringing back some experienced offensive linemen and added some via the portal. So this, I think, is this is nothing groundbreaking from this show. But I think Missouri is poised to be one of the most fun teams to watch in the entire country next year.
Yeah, 100%, Mike. I think I think I kind of shared your kind of thought when I was reading the Missouri scouting. I thought there might be a shot or two at Drink. Instead, it's actually pretty optimistic about things. I mean, especially that second comment there, a lot of other staffs just kind of expecting them to drop off. Well, I think this kind of gets at just the overall. There will be some skepticism of Missouri because they were sort of a newcomer, a new kid on the block last year to be in a New Year's Six bowl. But I think if you peel back the curtain, they're not a one-year wonder with what they can do offensively, which kind of points me to that first quote on Brady Cook. They've got to keep him healthy because there is zero, Drew Pine coming in gives them some experience, but if Brady Cook goes down, that's pretty much the season for Missouri. But man, you look at that firepower that they have, one of the best receiving corps in the country. Offensive line, I think, is still going to be pretty solid. This offense is going to score a ton of points. So I think there's a lot of reasons to sort of believe that any kind of sophomore slump, so to speak, that Missouri could face, the offense is good enough to overcome that.
Yeah. And hey, how about this, Stephen? Cousin Shane gave us $5 to talk Vanderbilt. What? Cousin Shane spent one day in Nashville. Now he's a huge Commodore. So I guess we got to play the little jingle here for him. But so we'll do Vanderbilt here in a moment. But we do got more on Mizzou here. Like I said, 2 graphics for each one. And again, no Drink, which is stunning to me. But here's the additional comments on Missouri from the anonymous coach comments section from the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine. They're weaker in the secondary than they were last year, and they have to replace Cody Schrader and the league is getting harder with no more East Division and adding the two Big 12 teams, I think they could be as good as last season on offense, and the defensive losses and the league changes might be what keeps them from finishing that high again. So interesting. This is not the first time I've heard this offseason comments on Missouri and their defense and what they've lost. Blake Baker, that's kind of being overlooked. Every Mizzou hater in the world wants to credit Cody Schrader for all the good Missouri did last year. Again, Cody Schrader was outstanding. He's All-American, All-SEC, should have been drafted. One of the best players in the conference last year. I get all that. So it's not like we can just easily replace him. But I think obviously what we're going to do is, instead of putting all that on one running back, we're going to split the carries, and we've added several transfers to do that. So I don't know. It's good to kind of get the other side, Stephen. Here's some kind of questioning of how good Missouri can be, while others believe they're going to be great. What are your thoughts on these comments?
Mike, I think that first comment that they're going to be weaker in the secondary, I think is pretty spot on. I think it's going to be hard to be as good as they were last season. Now not saying they're going to regress to 14th or 15th in the SEC in pass efficiency defense, but I do think overall defensive regression is something I worry about with Missouri. Like, what is going to be the drop off this season with the new coordinator and some of the new pieces? They have added a lot of transfers that I really think can come in and make an impact. Guys like Darius Smith, Toriano Pride at corner. They've got the right mix, I think, to keep this defense from dropping too far down the SEC order. But on the Cody Schrader thing, is like, as good as he was, it really didn't affect my kind of grade of Missouri coming into the season for two reasons. Number one, I think if you're going to replace somebody, running backs are probably pretty replaceable, even as good as he was. And I really like Marcus Carroll, Nate Noel. Like, I think that 1-2 punch is going to be just fine. So I would agree with the first one. And this on the second one too, I know there's no East and West divisions anymore, and the Big 12 teams are coming in. But their schedule's really favorable. It's really the perfect schedule. Like, if you do have some regression on defense this year, your schedule is easy enough to where they can make up for it. So I think, yes, there are no East and West, but at the same time, Missouri's schedule is about as good as you can ask for if you're trying to make a run to the playoff.
Right. It's almost like, because I agree with that logic. I mean, we'll get to Kentucky here. I don't want to go completely off the rails here of the conversation, but Kentucky, I think, is a prime example. Stephen, I threw up their schedule, but instead of just playing the East like they typically would and get Mississippi State out of the West, which I think most assume is probably in the lower half of the SEC. Instead of playing that schedule, you get at Ole Miss, you get at Texas. Oh yeah, and you get Auburn, which appears to be ascending. Oh, and you get to keep Georgia, and you're going to Tennessee. You know what I mean? Like, all these schedules are not the same. So what that coach said about Mizzou with the way they got their schedule, they got it perfectly here because they're getting first-year Mike Elko. They're getting first-year Jeff Lebby. There's a reason that most people view this as the least challenging schedule in the conference.
Also, not to mention the best year probably to catch Alabama in some time. Now, granted, it's in Tuscaloosa, it's still Alabama, but I think Alabama being a little bit more vulnerable is really kind of the right timing for Missouri. It's almost like that quote fit really well with what Kentucky, like you said, is facing this year. When you get Ole Miss and you get Texas and you change out some of those teams from the East, the schedule is getting a little bit harder for Kentucky. Whereas, there's no East for Missouri, but the breakdown and the way where the games fall is really favorable.
Right. Oh, buddy, Stephen, we got a big one here from Cousin Rick. He wants to do the magazine. We got to get together and make this happen. $100 from Cousin Rick. Man, what a cousin you are. The autograph magazine for each team's best fan is real. Love the show. Tommy Moffitt's 2024 Junction Boys is coming. Gig 'em. So I don't shade in your puny $5. We'll get to Vanderbilt in a minute. But for Cousin Rick, we're doing A&M. Let's get into the A&M. And he's going to love these comments.
Oh, yeah.
These were very complimentary of Mike Elko. Let's get into the Texas A&M coach comments here from the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine. Mike Elko was a fantastic hire. He has a ton of respect in this league and across the industry. He knows the program firsthand, and he's not going to worry about anything other than finding ways to win. It's going to be a night and day culture change at the head coaching position. Hallelujah! That's me. That was not the comment, but I threw that part in there. There's a lot of turnover coming from Jimbo Fisher's NIL mercenary type culture to what Mike Elko wants. And again, Steven, this is hitting the nail on the head, what we've been talking about all off season. If we just have a qualified adult in running Texas A&M, we can, I get it. I get all the A&M jokes because most of them are warranted, Stephen. They failed to live up to expectations, and that's, I think, even their fans, while they have high expectations this year, they don't want anyone else having them. You know what I mean? Because it's this program has failed to live up to them. So just overlook us. Texas is great. Texas go dominate the country, put them in the playoff, put them in the national championship. We're little old A&M. We ain't going to beat nobody. That's 100% probably what Mike Elko wants to hear as well, while he gets his guys geared up. And, oh, yeah, the best years under Jimbo Fisher, who was a defensive coordinator. That was old Mike Elko over there. So if we can get the defense back to the way it was just a couple of years ago, we get the offense going. We're not running 2013 offense over here in College Station anymore. We got us one hell of a program.
I think if you're a Texas A&M fan, that quote right there ought to give you a ton of confidence into the season. I think other coaches around the SEC are really high on the Mike Elko hire, but not only that, I think it's kind of gets Mike at what you and I have said all offseason, and that Mike Elko is just a ball coach. Jimbo Fisher worried too much about a lot of other things and about what the media coverage was saying about him and trying to X people out of the program, and some of the culture things were terrible behind the scenes. This is a complete 180 under Mike Elko. It is going to be a complete difference, and that's kind of what the coach is getting at there. I think you're going to see Mike Elko just concentrate on figuring out ways to take all the really, really good ingredients about A&M and find ways to turn that potential into production and win. So we see every year that head coaches can make a big time impact in their first year. I think about Kalen DeBoer in his first season at Washington. They were awful under Jimmy Lake, but they had a lot of really good pieces. The right coach came in, patched things up, put the right tweaks into place, and they ended up having a good season. In the second year, of course, they made the national championship game. It's going to be harder for that climb in the SEC, but I expect A&M to be much improved this year under Mike Elko.
Yep. And then we got some more comments here. These are interesting.
These are very interesting.
One of this kind of blew me out of my chair here. But again, these are the anonymous comments from the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine. Marcel Reed might be a better overall quarterback than Connor Wigman. Whoa, buddy. And again, that's my commentary. Don't be shocked if he's the starter at some point this season by beating him out or by injury. They could be really scary on defense. That's not going to be a first-year head coach situation. Mike Elko knows the personnel, and they're really talented. The program has a chance to shift its entire identity this season to hard-nosed, defensive-minded, all that stuff, which can really fit that place. They could be a hell of a place to play. And, Steven, again, very, very impressed with what I saw from Marcel Reed in the bowl game. Again, they lost the game. They were, didn't have a coach. There was a lot of things going on there. But I always say this, and I believe it holds firm, that when I look at a true freshman playing at the highest level of college football, the only thing I really judge him on is, does the game look too big for him? And the game did not look too big for Marcel Reed. Now, having said that, we've not seen a ton from Connor Wigman, but what we have seen from him, he looks sensational. So this is going a step too far for me. But again, if you got two great quarterbacks, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what we kind of said at the beginning, which is some of these coaches' comments do not necessarily represent our views on things this season, because I was stunned to read that first quote about Marcel Reed being better than Connor Wigman. And I really like Marcel Reed. I think, like you said, Mike, the bowl game, I always think, kind of like you said with quarterbacks, like when I watch them the first or second time they play, they either have it or they don't. And some guys will get better, but Marcel Reed seems to have it. And I think to see him beating out Connor Wigman this year would be really surprising, even though I like what I saw. We mentioned Jackson Arnold, but I think Connor Wigman is going to be right up there in the breakout category at quarterback this year. So I was really stunned to even see that. But I think the second part of that quote, though, they could be really scary on defense. 100%. Mike, you and I have talked about, I think that defensive end tandem that they have this year, really underrated. Maybe they don't have necessarily the depth on defense that they had maybe last year or the year before. But I think this defense is going to be really salty this season. I think we'll just be better overall from having Mike Elko on the sideline. So I think that's kind of a peek behind the curtain of why A&M, the sports books really like them as far as lines so far for this season, and why they could probably surprise some people.
And any chance, Stephen, again, you would know better than I watching Kansas State over the years. The only time I watch Kansas State is when they play Missouri. But could you perhaps make the argument that maybe Marcel Reed fits the Colin Klein's offense better than Connor Wigman? And again, we're not sitting here saying Reed's going to be the starter or anything like that, but maybe, that there is something to that, to where, again, they're not going to switch because one guy can run a little bit better or anything like that. But is there any way you could, in your mind, get some logic to that comment?
Yeah, I think first of all, the thing that comes to mind about Colin Klein is how he was as a player, which was kind of like I'll use an NFL reference. He was like an AFC North kind of quarterback. And I mean that he was like the black and blue, like bruises in the first guy in the hot tub after the game, because, he was such a vital piece to that ground game. And I think you saw that with his offenses the last couple of years, whether that was Adrian Martinez in 2022, Will Howard a little bit last year. So, they have leaned on the quarterback run. I don't know that you want Connor Wigman doing that 10 times a week. So yeah, I could see maybe some of the other quarterbacks fitting the run game better. But I think the beauty in what Colin Klein has done, he's been very adaptable to different quarterbacks at K-State, which makes me think that he'll do just fine with Connor Wigman.
Mm-hmm. All right, so for Cousin Shane, we're doing Vanderbilt anonymous coach comments from the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine. A lot of people thought the university would have a really, really long leash for Clark Lea, but that might not be the case. They're marginally better than when the staff started, and if not for a few upsets 2 seasons ago, it looks even worse. I would argue it looks worse for Billy Napier and Mark Stoops, but that's neither here nor there. There aren't clear expectations at Vanderbilt, but they've got to be more competitive. The portal era has hit programs like this really hard, and that second part really stands out to me, Stephen, where, yeah, I mean, goodness. I mean, they were bad last year. I think, for good reason, Vanderbilt kind of gets overlooked in a lot of ways. But I don't think people realize, and they're going to realize quickly this fall, the losses the Commodores suffered, because it was virtually every playmaker they had, aside from, a handful. But most of their players are gone, and we're talking the best players on a team that was terrible. And I don't think these are locker room cancer. We always, how some fans, we're better off. Addition by subtraction. No, not at Vanderbilt. We need about 20 times addition to get to a competitive SEC level. So, I mean, this is interesting, Stephen, because you were the first one to put it out there, and anyone that listens to SEC After Dark knows Stephen is not prone to be making hot takes or anything like that. But if just putting it fair, if they go winless in the SEC again, what would that'd be 3 out of 4 years winless. I don't know what you can point to for causes to bring him back, and I'm rooting for him. Yeah. He seems like a heck of a guy. He's Vanderbilt through and through. If anybody cares about their university more than Clark Lea, I mean, the only one that comes to the top of my mind is maybe Kirby Smart. In terms of just SEC coaches that are just bleed their university. So, but these are some pretty damning comments here.
Yeah, I think Cousin Shane, I think, has mentioned this a couple times this offseason about how Vanderbilt would have been better off, like in one of the portal era has really hurt them a lot. Because if you think about what Vanderbilt needs, they really need like 2 or 3 kind of cycles of player development. Instead of now they're just developing players and they end up leaving, and they have to sort of backfill the roster with Ivy League and G5 guys right now. And of course, they got some power conference transfers in there, but the portal era has really, really hurt teams like Vanderbilt. It's very difficult. You have to be very good at NIL and retention, which Vanderbilt has some room to catch up there. But I think on the first quote there for Clark Lee, I think there's probably a lot of want to in seeing him succeed by the Vanderbilt administration. Like you said, he's a Vanderbilt guy, but at the same time, if you go winless in the SEC and your scoring margins are still so out of whack to where you're so far behind the rest of the league, I don't know that you can bring him back for another year and risk falling even further behind. I think you could tolerate maybe a winless season if you have some close losses, like you're just more competitive across the board. And that's why I think 0-8, if it's not really competitive, I think you got to move on if you're Vanderbilt and sort of look for that next guy, because I just don't think you have time to fall behind in this new era of college football.
Yeah, Cousin Shane says that tie should get him fired right there that he's wearing. But all right, we got one more Vanderbilt anonymous coach comments here. Bringing in offensive coordinator Tim Beck and the New Mexico State quarterback Diego Pavia is interesting, but they've had really bad offensive line play, so it may not matter. Remember, those are the guys that beat Auburn handedly on the Plains last year. Clark Lee is calling the defense again, which he hasn't done up to this point. And he's a great defensive coordinator, but it's all about personnel in this league, and they aren't out-scheming anyone. They've got to find a way to find, keep, and develop more talent, and they're not going to get back to 500. Sorry for butchering that. But and when I said he's not been a play caller, I mean strictly at Vanderbilt. He was at Notre Dame, did an outstanding job. So I'm glad to see that's kind of coming back on the defensive side of the ball. I think, clearly if you're going to go down, you got to go down swinging, Stephen. And there's probably no one better and more qualified to call this defense in Nashville than Clark Lee.
100%. I think that's a smart move for Clark Lee. I actually think he had a really good offseason to some extent on the coaching front. I know it's weird to say with what happened with the roster, but I do think Tim Beck is a massive upgraded offensive coordinator. His offenses at New Mexico State were pretty creative. Thought he did a really nice job of utilizing the personnel. Diego Pavia, already the familiarity with the offense too. It shouldn't, kind of take much time to get him up to speed. I think Pavia is really fascinating. He's a fun player. I think he could maybe be a little chaotic at times, but it could be a good thing for Vanderbilt. So I think if you're Clark Lee, you've upgraded at offensive coordinator and you've upgraded at defensive coordinator. So in some ways, you're in a little better spot at a couple situations coming into the season.
Right. And I don't know if you saw this in the comments here, Stephen, but Michael Raleigh says, Mike and Steven would be starters at Vanderbilt this year. So if that's true, they're in bigger trouble than I thought,
Yeah, I think I could barely make it down the stairs right now with a foot injury. I think I get roasted in pass coverage.
All right, so I'm not seeing any other donations, so we're going to go back to alphabetical order. I was waiting for this one, Steven. I've been sitting on it. But we got some comments for Auburn and Hugh Freeze, my favorite head coach here. Let's go. Yeah, again, Auburn, anonymous coach comments. Among coaches, the jury's still out. $1 million on a quarterback. Those are his words, not mine. Even though it's the most important position in the game and virtually every SEC quarterback's making that. But, again, we ain't doing that at Auburn. And that's fine because we like scoring 20 points per game and winning 7 games. But, man, I think he's nailed it. Again, I don't get all the hype with Hugh Freeze. I don't get all the hype with Auburn. I get it. High school recruiting, they're doing well. That's because they don't practice or game plan or prepare for bowl games, apparently. But, again, if that's where your coach's priorities are in 2024, I think he's in over his head. Not saying that's specifically the case with Hugh Freeze because he's been doing this long enough. He should know better. I think he's just, quite frankly, making excuses. But Your thoughts on all these. I can sit here and bash Hugh Freeze all day, Stephen. I'll let you go.
Yeah, let me kind of dispel a rumor real quick. Mike did not do the coach scouting for this one. It was an actual coach of the SEC. So let me reassure you, this came from another coach. So no, I think as I read this kind of first quote on Hugh Freeze, I think there was sort of like a ceiling and floor kind of thought into my mind. Like it does feel like Auburn's floor has been raised, but I still wonder, is Hugh Freeze the guy to get Auburn close to Georgia and Texas and Alabama that you're going to need to be on an annual basis? Or are you sort of in that second tier of the SEC? So I think that's kind of the question I'm looking for going forward. But a lot of that goes into the second part of that, which is the quarterback play. When you look at the quarterbacks in the league this year, Auburn's situation ranks in the back half of the SEC closer to 10, 11. I think Peyton Thorne will be better this year. Maybe the thought is they've been trying to upgrade some of these positions in recruiting, and next year will be the guy they can go out and find the right fit at quarterback, and sort of using Peyton Thorne as sort of a guy to pass the torch. I still think that they should have been a little bit more aggressive in bringing in competition. There was seemed like there was a renewed push after the bowl game to get someone else. So really the two biggest questions for Auburn remain is how good can Peyton Thorne be this year, and what can Hugh Freeze do to prove that this year that Auburn is clearly moving up in the tiers, and those are the things we're watching this year.
And we got some more comments here, anonymous comments here from the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine on Auburn. Hugh Freeze is going to be the play caller. He won't hand that off to Derek Nix, the new offensive coordinator, but it's Auburn. So they're used to that with Gus Malzahn, of course. That's pretty funny. We got some comedians here in the coaching ranks. They aren't close to the top end of the league, but they are absolutely better than the Brian Harsin rosters at offensive line and receiver, and probably defensive line too. Maybe they pick up somebody late in the quarterback in the portal. Otherwise, expect some improvement from Thorne, but he's not a world beater. They are headed up slowly. So, this is kind of interesting. It's kind of where we're at again. Again, every bad thing I've said about Hugh Freeze, he's far more qualified than Brian Harsin to actually acquire talent, bring him into the Auburn and all that. But again, you're going to be hamstrung, I think, by the quarterback. So this is kind of what I believe as well, because basically the same thing they're saying here. I mean, Auburn, as improved as they may be, they're probably still in the if we're just taking, remember they're 16 in the SEC now. If you're having the league, Auburn's roster is probably in the bottom half, not by a ton. I'm not saying they're like the 15th roster in the SEC or something crazy, but they're probably like 9 or 10. And if you don't have an elite quarterback, you can't punch up and steal wins against those others. And that's kind of where I'm at with Auburn.
Yeah, I think, Mike, that kind of echoes where I am with this team this season. Like, I do feel like they are in a better spot. And I think I would agree with that second coach comment that they are light years ahead of where they were under Brian Harsin, in a much better spot as far as recruiting, understanding what it takes to win in this league, and understanding your opponents week in and week out. But at the same time, though, if you start thinking about like a power ranking for this season or even post spring, Auburn is in that next tier for me after Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and you're talking about breakout quarterbacks like Connor Wigman, Jackson Arnold, even a guy like Graham Mertz or DJ Lagway, I think are ahead there. So they're in a better spot, but in order to get into that top 25 conversation, as much as I like the improvements on the rosters, transfers, recruiting, returning talent, they're really capped by the quarterback position unless Peyton Thorne just really takes his game to the next level. I think he's really solid. I just don't know what the upside is this season. I think it's pretty limited right now.
Mm-hmm. All right. So next, I'm not seeing any other comments, donations. So until we get any, to jump your team to the front of the line here, let's go with Florida. It's going to be a good one here, Steven. Florida Gators. Anonymous comments here on Billy Napier, and this is before the lawsuit and everything was fine. Sorry, just had to get that in there. It's do or die time. I think a lot of coaches respect how Billy Napier has gone about his business, but there's a level of expectations in the SEC, and you have to build your plans around that accelerated pace. quarterback Graham Mertz coming back might have saved Billy's job. And I particularly thought that final comment, Stephen, was dead on, because without Graham Mertz, I hope DJ Lagway's awesome, but and he probably will be, but just based on what little we've seen from him in the spring and the recruitings and all that. But will he be awesome come September 1st? Probably not. It's probably going to take him a year if he's going to get to that level. But again, I think Graham Mertz poised to be one of the breakout stars of the SEC, and if he is, and Florida somehow, some way gets to 8 wins or heaven forbid 9 wins. If they get the 9 wins, they're probably going to the playoff with that schedule. But I think that'll be the thing that saves him if he can be saved. But this other first part, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with. Yeah, it's hard to find, short of Jaden Rashada, anybody that's going to tell you that Billy Napier is not a great man and this and that, and he's changed. I keep hearing they've changed the culture down there, Stephen. He's fired up at SEC spring meetings. He's saying we're doing fantastic down in Gainesville. And the fans are behind their coach. I get it. But he's 11-14, and they're acting like he's 41 and 1. And as soon as he loses a game next year, they're going to want to fire his ass. Because this is year 3, and this is the University of Florida, and you're supposed to be competing for championships. And what we're doing, Stephen, is we are competing for friggin' Birmingham Bowl. And I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. But it would be a break if Florida made it to one, because that would be better than what they've done under Billy Napier.
Isn't it super crazy to read the sentence, Graham Mertz coming back might save Billy's job? I mean, try telling somebody that last season, right? They would have thought like you're crazy to think that Graham Mertz could save his job, but no. I mean, I like the potential of the Mertz and Lagway quarterback tandem. I think, however Napier makes it work, Mertz was very good last year in that system, and I suspect that he'll take another step forward. Mike, you and I talked about this last week. I like the pickup of Elijah Badger too, the transfer from Arizona State, giving them another weapon in the passing game. And I think on the first part of that, I think there's no doubt about it. It does feel like Florida is in a better place now than they were like at the first month of Billy Napier's coaching tenure. But there is a level of like a threshold of like patience versus turning that into production. There's a lot of stuff that Napier had to fix and off the field stuff, but this is Florida. I mean, they've won national championships. They should be competing for college football playoff spots. It shouldn't take 4 years to turn this thing around. So I know the schedule is difficult, but I think there needs to be some results this year, and that means getting to a bowl game.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get to the second portion here of these anonymous comments on the Florida Gators. The coaching staff is almost totally different, especially on the defensive side. That's the biggest problem we've heard about, that the internal system isn't right there. And the roster will be the best they've had. There was a pretty significant drop in talent at the end of the Dan Mullen years, but that excuse has run out. The schedule is brutal, but for them, the schedule is brutal for them, but they should be able to find a way to a bowl. So that's interesting. I mean, I enjoy the fact, Stephen, when we get kind of like conflicting information, not information, but just opinions, I guess you'd call it, where, hey, your back's against the wall, the talent's better, but there's issues, but we might make a bowl, which again, if they go 6-6, I think for sure they bring back Billy Napier, and he would get another year to prove what he can do. It's fascinating that that's good enough at Florida these days, but that's neither here nor there. But what jumps out all over the place kind of with these comments, Stephen, but what stands out here for you?
I think it's the first one. This coach saying the biggest problem that they've heard about was the internal system isn't right there. And that kind of raised a lot of intrigue for me as to try to figure out what exactly they were hinting at. Were they hinting about coaches on defense before, the structure, maybe the culture of the defense, everything? So I think changing it up, bringing in Ron Roberts, a guy who's worked with Billy Napier, can help answer some of those questions and make it so that that's not the biggest problem internally. And I think that kind of the other two, Mike, it kind of goes to what you and I were just talking about. I think Florida's in a better place than they were 2 years ago, but it's almost like the basic expectation this year is just to get to a bowl game. They were 2 plays away from beating Missouri and getting that 6 win last year, so they're not that far off. And we could argue with a better roster, they should be able to find a way to 6 wins, but it's going to be really important to get those 6 out of the way early in the year.
Yep. All right, Stephen, I'm not seeing any other donations. Again, if you want your team kicked up to the top of the list, throw us any kind of donation whatsoever. So we'll go next with them Georgia Bulldogs, Stephen. And again, not a ton of huge revelations for this one necessarily, but here's what the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine and the anonymous coach sections had to say about Georgia Bulldogs. With Nick Saban retiring, this is the best overall program in college football right now. If the current Ohio State had a national title, you might have an argument there. But entering 2024, this is the standard. They're still the first team to put in the conference title and playoff conversation. And again, I think, like I was saying, Stephen, not a huge revelations there, but this is seemingly the consensus opinion of people in and out around the game, and for good reason. I mean, I just asked Rusty Manziel the other day, is Georgia the new Alabama? And I don't know how anyone can kind of debate that at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, to go back to kind of talking about a preseason ranking and constructing it, in the past, we would just assume Alabama, put it in pen somewhere in the top 3. Well, Georgia's kind of replaced Alabama of getting that benefit of the doubt year in and year out. They're going to be the top 1, 2, or 3 team in the country to some extent. So I think that this is the standard right now in college football. They've won 2 out of the last 3. Had they beaten Alabama last year, they probably would have won the national title. I think some would agree with that. So they are the standard right now in college football for sure.
And any thoughts? I'll probably ask you this. I apologize if I repeat myself here, Stephen. But just given the fact the schedule's difficult, and there's a lot of conversation with, how many games could Georgia lose and still could they lose 2 and make the playoff? The schedule's really tough. Could they lose 3 and make the playoff? I mean, I feel like Kirby's maniacal enough. He's going to tape that up all over the locker room, and they're just going to blow out everybody on their way to the college football playoff. Could you, I guess what I'm asking you, could you see extra motivation? Whereas last year, the conversation was, how in the world can this good of a team have this terrible of a schedule? We've essentially flip-flopped it and said, man, this is, even for the mighty Georgia Bulldogs, it's going to be tough to go undefeated. It's just like any kind of motivation they can get down there in Athens. I think they're going to use it.
Oh, 100%. You know it, Mike. They're going to find every article that's got Georgia at maybe like 8-4, 9-3 printed out, put it on the facility. They'll use it as motivation. I do think that Georgia could probably go 10-2 and still make the playoff. I know they're over under, like you had there in the board, is 10.5. I think it'd probably be surprising to me if they lost 2 games this season.
Yeah. And Stephen, it may sound like your mic got unplugged or something. You may want to check that out. But we got some other comments here and we got a donation. So we're going to get to South Carolina next. But we got some more still for them Georgia Bulldogs. And these are some good ones here, Stephen, via the Athlon Sports anonymous coach comments section. If you're looking for a fault, it might be that all of the quarterback Carson Beck's safety valve options at receiver and tight end are gone. Obviously, they brought in some studs to add to what they've recruited, but having a Brock Bowers is like a cheat code for a young quarterback. I think we could all agree on that. This is Carson Beck's offense now, so his development this offseason is critical. And then on the defensive side of the ball, the comments, Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson are both back, and that defensive line should be better. They weren't bad, but by Kirby Smart's standards, there was a step back after Jalen Carter and those guys left, obviously, for the NFL. So, this is the first time all offseason, Stephen, that I have seen essentially anyone question, not that he's, calling out Carson Beck saying he's a bad player or anything, but everywhere you see Carson Beck, Heisman front runner, NFL draft boards have him as, the likely number, I don't know about number 1 pick, but they say number 1 quarterback, which essentially is number 1 pick these days. But interesting that, with like the comment says here, Brock Bowers gone, Ladd McConkey gone. And without those guys, that's why a big reason why they lost to Alabama was those guys were not at 100%. Any thoughts on some slight concerns? I think is kind of the fair way to say it about Carson Beck here.
I think maybe where you would kind of worry about this showing up is maybe like in the national championship or like a college football playoff game. Like if we play Ohio State with a good defense that Ohio State has, could they take away some of those pieces and then miss a kind of a safety valve like a Brock Bowers? But at the same time though, Mike, I look at their skill talent and you see a guy like Dominic Lovett. You see Dylan Bell, Colby Young transferring in this offseason, London Humphreys. You throw Oscar Delp and Ben Urasek. They've really got, I think, it may not be the best receiving core in the country, but it's got to be top 5, top 10. So I think in time, sort of the pecking order will sort of form out, and they will miss the overall, I think, versatility and production of Brock Bowers. But I think they'll find ways to move the ball without a doubt through the air. So I don't have a ton of concerns about Carson Beck. I thought the quote about the defensive line was really interesting because there's no doubt that defensive line was good last year, but also at the same time, it wasn't as good as it has been. And I think that's why we saw the defensive line, especially the rushing stats on defense, regressed a little bit last season. And I think there's a really solid collection of pieces there. There's maybe not a Jalen Carter or someone else to be a first team All-American, but at the same time, though, this feels like a really solid defensive front, could be one of the best in the country again. So I'm not really worried about anything for Georgia. I think if it does show up, it might be a game like at Texas or maybe against Ohio State in the national championship.
Right. And you got it good when people are saying, your number 1 overall pick, possibly the Heisman front runner. Can he be as good as he was last? I mean, if that's the critique we have, we're pretty solid here. So appreciate you, Todd. Cousin Todd gave us a $5 donation. Let's tackle South Carolina next, Stephen. And these were some interesting comments too, I thought. Starting with some on Shane Beamer here. Again, these are the comments from the Athlon Sports anonymous coach section. Shane Beamer is a great football guy overall, just a high energy, passionate thinker. Can't say enough good about him. Last year was just a reality, hitting the wall. That's what it's like in this league when you're trying to maintain success at any program, but especially one that has to fight for everything in the shadow of the big boys. And I think, this really hit me, Stephen, because this is something I've been thinking about. Again, they exceeded expectations. First 2 years under Beamer. The first year, they were expected to be awful. People just completely forget that. They made a bowl game, and they whooped North Carolina that year. Now, they come back the next year. I don't want to say sideways. They didn't quite, take that big step until late. And then they beat Tennessee. Not only they beat Tennessee, they whooped their ass. Then they beat Clemson. And then you think, okay, we have arrived, and then they took us just a slight step. It's not like they fell off or anything like that. They were one game away from making the postseason. So a lot of injuries, but I mean that goes right to these comments. South Carolina, where they're at currently, cannot sustain multiple starters on the offensive line going down and not have a big hit there, and that's exactly what happened. And for every hit that they take there, they get a guy like Xavier Legette, who I don't think anyone outside of South Carolina fans even know who the hell that was last year. They turned him into a first-round pick. So they're coaching their butts off down there. And I don't know if you've seen this, Stephen, but it depends on how you want to look at it. But like my buddy Dave Bartu, CFB Matrix, he says if South Carolina goes 4-8 next year, again, that's an awful record, right? That's what the coaching grade would suggest would be just like a zero record. Like that's what they're supposed to do based on their talent, based on the games they're playing, is projected 4-8. And that's not because they're some awful team. That's because of the schedule they got. And another way I saw it, for anybody, maybe you don't like Dave Bartu, maybe you like Bill Connolly, and his S&P Plus has something to the effect where I think South Carolina, they play teams between number 1 and number 16 in Bill Connolly's rankings, and between 1 and 16, and then higher than 95. So from 16 to 95, South Carolina's got one opponent that ranks between 16 and 95, and it's I think this may be Power 5 or something like that, but it's some insanely difficult road map, and essentially one opponent, and it's Kentucky, which ranks like 30th in Bill Connolly's metrics. All the rest of the teams are either in that top
margin for error that this team has.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven. So we got more comments here for South Carolina. Let's kick it over to the anonymous coach section here. Boom. Quarterback Lenore Sellers is going to be their starter, but the Auburn quarterback Robbie Ashford could really push him. There was another one. This I remember now. This actually got cut off, but they said they could really use some help via the transfer portal on the receiver as well. So that should be noted. But the defense moved to a hybrid kind of 3-3 thing last season because they were getting smoked in the pass game. I think they're going to have to keep finding, keep the 5 DB looks. So, again, nothing too revealing here, but the fact that you're having to kind of scheme around your personnel, that's a real issue for any team in the SEC. You know what?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also gets kind of at their transfer portal pickups this offseason. When you look at some of the guys they brought in, especially along the defensive line and at linebacker, they're in a little better spot there in terms of depth. But also, I think there are some guys who can get after the quarterback, which should help them be able to probably defend the pass a little bit better. They're not going to be asking their defensive backs to maybe cover as long if you can get to the quarterback. Getting Kyle Kennard, Gilbert Edmond coming back into the program, there's a chance there to have a little bit of an upgraded pass rush. But I think really the ultimate X factor for South Carolina is Lenore Sellers. I know the scouting says Robbie Ashford could push him, but at the same time, this to me seems like South Carolina is going to rise and fall on Lenore Sellers and just how good he is this season. If he can deliver, kind of have that breakout season, then I think there's a chance that South Carolina exceeds all these expectations and gets to that 6-7 win type of year.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven. So next on the docket, let's get to Kentucky, where interesting comments here. Mark Stoops and company. After the Texas A&M flirtation with Mark Stoops, a lot of us think he's probably going to end up retiring from Kentucky in a few years. He'll leave the game at a smart age the way his brother Bob did, obviously at Oklahoma there. Before that, they've got to rework that offense again. It's remarkable in this league how often they lose offensive coordinators and the program doesn't collapse. And that's kind of funny there at the end, because that has been one thing that has kind of haunted Mark Stoops is he's had some misses at offensive coordinator. But again, big if here, but if they hit with the Bush Hamden here, there's a reason why a lot of people think Kentucky could be one of the biggest surprise teams in the SEC. Got to hit at quarterback, obviously, but Kentucky seems like they're at a weird crossroads here to me.
Yeah, they do. I kind of feel that way too, Mike. I mean, they're coming off back-to-back 7-win seasons, and I'm not really sure what to make of the Bush Hamden hire. He was, I think, pretty solid at Boise State. Can he help take this offense kind of to the next level? I think it's if you're just choosing between Liam Cohen and Bush Hamden, I would much rather have Liam Cohen as my offensive coordinator. And plus, you add in the whole variable of having a first-time, brand new kind of wild card at quarterback this year in Brock Vandegrift. Now, on the positive side, I think you've got a great receiving core, a lot of pieces coming back on defense, and the offensive line is very experienced. So there are some reasons I think that this Kentucky offense can easily kind of exceed all of our expectations this year. But they are kind of at a weird spot, starting over, new OC, new quarterback, head coach who was Texas A&M's coach for like 10 minutes. It's kind of an interesting turning kind of fork in the road for the program here.
Yep. All right. And then, so the secondary comments here for the Kentucky Wildcats. And there's a little bit more positive here. They might have one of the best defensive lines in the league, and they're really good at playing the run. The measure for success is if they can install another new scheme to fit another transfer quarterback, who, of course, is Brock Vandegrift from Georgia. So, again, hype for the defense. I'm hearing a lot. We just talked. We haven't aired this yet, Stephen, but we met with Nick Roush, Kentucky Sports Radio, the other day. We're going to put that, post that soon. But he basically said he thinks Kentucky's going to be a top 3 team defending the run in the entire conference. So if they can reach that level, that's obviously an elite level. But again, they're kind of playing with fire here again with changing the scheme, changing the quarterback. And the fact that I believe this is going to be the 8th year in a row that Kentucky has started a quarterback that they did not recruit at a high school. Now, we're in a new era, so, I mean, it's fair to say that as well. But at some point, you got to develop a quarterback, don't you?
Yeah, I think you would like to have a homegrown quarterback at some point, right? Because you don't know what's going to be in the portal every year. Now, to some extent, I think some of the portal thing is some asking who's going to be in, who's going to be out, maybe recruiting guys to get in there. So there'll probably be a healthy supply of quarterbacks on a yearly basis. But I think that is kind of an interesting storyline for Kentucky, because Vandegrift kind of holds the cards to the season. Like, if he's good and he and Bush Hamden really hit, there's the personnel that this offense could really take off. I also like that first comment about the defensive line, because I really like watching Deion Walker. I think he's, like I said about Landon Jackson, I think he's incredibly underrated and probably doesn't get enough love outside of the SEC for how good he is. And they were second in the SEC against the run last year. You add another year of Walker, plus bringing in Jamon Dumas-Johnson as a kind of a run stuffer at linebacker. They got the makings for a really, really salty front seven.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, let's move along with LSU. Interesting comments here in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine from anonymous coaches on LSU, Stephen. They've been sort of off schedule, you could say. They had the Heisman quarterback a little too soon, because if you plugged in Jaden Daniels into year 3 staff and roster, I think they could contend for a conference title and a playoff seed. The quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier, isn't as talented as Daniels, but he can manage the talent around him, which, this is kind of the feeling I'm getting here, Stephen, where a lot of people are expecting LSU to compete for a playoff spot. They're just, thinking, well, the defense got to be better, right? With all the staff changes, which the staff changes, I think, were all improvements. I'll give them that, but I don't think you just plug those guys in and we got elite defense all of a sudden. But I think there's a real danger, Stephen, of a team that went 9-3 in the regular season with all the offensive firepower they had. I mean, it's not crazy to say they could be 8-4, 7-5 if they take a significant step back on offense and they don't improve on defense. Again, no one is saying that. I'm not exactly predicting that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it wouldn't stun me. What was your thoughts after seeing these comments?
I think it's going to your point, it's going to be hard to replicate 45.5 points a game offensively. When you lose the Heisman Trophy winner, your offensive coordinator is now at Notre Dame, and you had 2 high picks at receiver off to the NFL. And also, I think the first kind of comment there, they are kind of off schedule because if you think about it, they should probably be better just almost by default on defense this season. I don't know how much, but I think getting closer to middle of the league in those statistics is probably reasonable. And so if you combine that with a high powered offense, yeah, that is a team that should easily be in the playoff because they lost by 1 score to Ole Miss. And of course, they probably would have been a lot closer to Florida State or Alabama had they been able to play a little bit better defense in those games. So they are a little bit of a wild card for me. They are probably one of the teams that I've had a little bit harder of a time trying to figure out is how does that offensive regression plus some defensive improvement. They've won 10 games in back-to-back years, and their schedule's kind of favorable with where the home games fall. But there's also some opportunities there at Florida, at Texas A&M, at South Carolina, at Arkansas that are not going to be easy by any means.
Right. And then here's the second part of the anonymous quotes from LSU. This is the best assistant coach roster Brian Kelly has at LSU, and maybe the best of his entire career. It's a bunch of killers in recruiting, guys who are veteran culture builders in the league. Joe Sloan, the new offensive coordinator, is going to work out really nicely. He was the quarterbacks coach last year. They could still make the playoff as an at-large this season if the defense gels the way it looks. Blake Baker is a sharp guy, and they could be brutal to play by season's end. And that first part really grabbed my attention, Stephen, with the coaches and just their ability to recruit, because I know LSU did lose a commitment from a 5-star recently, but prior to that, they had the number 1 recruiting class in the country, several 5-stars committed. I'm sure they'll land many elite prospects, but just the early returns on this staff on the recruiting trail alone have been highly, highly impressive. But that is another thing that I think gets lost in the conversation. Yes, Joe Sloan was there last year, quarterbacks coach, and I am by no means saying that that's a bad choice, because all indication I've heard is he is great. Great recruiter, great quarterback coach and developer, and clearly Jaden Daniels' progression would indicate that. But they did lose a really good offensive coordinator who went back to Notre Dame. So that is another question that I have, that I don't know that Joe Sloan has called a game, and I certainly know he's not done it in the SEC outside of the bowl game last year. So that is a little bit of a concern of mine as well.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say I think Joe Sloan is one of those coaches that he's on the rise in terms of potential, but also kind of on a little bit of a pressure pack situation, taking over for Mike Denbrock, who led the number 1 scoring offense in the country, led the Heisman Trophy winner. Now, on the upside, Joe Sloan was pretty heavily involved with that, so you would think if you don't have to reinvent things, you still have one of the best setups in college football with Nussmeier coming back and some of the guys they have at receiver, plus a pretty potent system. I do think that the assistant coaching situation is significantly better. Like adding Bo Davis to be a defensive line coach, some of the other guys they brought in to go with Blake Baker, their staff is in a much better place. So, Brian Kelly's had a pretty good start, back-to-back double-digit win seasons, but getting this defense fixed could really be what helps LSU get over the hump. Of course, like the scouting says, I think LSU will be better at season's end, but I do think that there is some talent accumulation that still needs to happen here to get it closer to the top of the SEC.
Yep. And then how about this comment from Cousin PJ, Stephen? $20 donation. We appreciate you. Texas gonna drag their nuts on Kentucky. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate the $20 and I appreciate the comment. So we're going to do Texas next. But Cousin Rick chimed right back in and says, whoa. To be a better show, we can skip Texas, cover Vandy again. So I just love the back and forth between Texas and Texas A&M already. So let's get into Texas. Good stuff here in the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine Anonymous Coach section. I think there's a tendency to look at the league expansion from a point of view of the new programs having to acclimate to the league, but this might be the other way around. You can't compare Texas or OU to those Texas A&M and Mizzou programs that just came in. they're going to pair the Bama receiver transfer, Isaiah Bond, with their other 5 stars and probably won't miss much at this position. Whoa, buddy, especially that, throwing A&M and Mizzou under the bus and basically saying this is like comments from a coach that I've been bashing all offseason. Basically the SEC better get ready for Texas, not the other way around. So if I'm a Longhorn, I mean, my goodness, I'm on cloud 9 with this stuff.
Yeah, I think if you're, like you said, if you're a Texas fan, you got to love hearing these things as Texas comes into the league, that the SEC teams, whether that's Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, name your Ole Miss, name your top 5, top 10, 15 team this season, and basically saying that Texas is going to have a chance to run this league in its first year. On one side, I think there is always an adjustment period for teams coming into a conference. They have to learn 15 new opponents, 15 different new atmospheres, 15 different new coaching staffs. Whereas if they were in the Big 12, they sort of have this data kind of accumulation from year over year. So I do think there is going to be a little bit of adjustment period. Probably not one that's going to cost Texas a ton of games, but I do think they enter the league in kind of a different spot than some maybe Missouri or A&M did, because they were just in the playoff last season. They're picked in the top 5. But I will say you look at Texas's schedule, and yes, while it is pretty favorable, going to Arkansas, going to A&M, getting Georgia, going to Michigan in year 1, 2, there are some tough games on that schedule. So I don't think by any means is it going to be a cakewalk for the Longhorns in their SEC debut.
Right. And again, there's no guarantees this is going to happen, Stephen, but just speaking of the schedule, I think this is, we all do it. We're all guilty of it. But let's say Florida wins 8-9 games. All of a sudden, that's much trickier of a matchup. Let's say Cousin Shane, he thinks Kentucky is the breakout team in the SEC. Let's say he nailed it with Mizzou last year. Let's say it's Kentucky this year. All of a sudden, that's a tricky game. A&M, that's going to be a damn war. I don't care if A&M is 0-11. That's going to be a damn war there. And then Arkansas again, Bobby Petrino, Taylor Green. If these guys hit, again, now Texas probably going to be favored in all those games. So I'm not sitting here saying it's going to be like they're going to go 4-8 or anything, but you just don't know in the SEC. And outside of, I think, Vanderbilt and Mississippi State, and I'm only throwing Mississippi State in there because it's year 1 Jeff Lebby. It's in Austin and all that. But any other year you catch Mississippi State, that's a lot of good teams have lost to Mississippi State over the years. You know what?
Yeah, especially with this game for Texas being at home against Mississippi State. If you had to go to Starkville year 2 under Jeff Lebby, maybe you're looking at a little bit of kind of a difficult trip there. But I also thought what was interesting about that scouting was talking about Isaiah Bond and some of the other receivers that Texas has. Texas does lose a lot at receiver, but I actually feel really good about this group. I mean, I think Silas Bolden is going to be kind of a good, solid, steady route runner. You get guys like Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond to stretch the field, and what they've added in recruiting the last couple of years, I feel like they're in a pretty good spot in the receiving core. We'll find out September 7th because Michigan's secondary is one of the best in the country, and Will Johnson, their cornerback, is going to be a first-round pick next year. So there'll be some early tests for Quinn Ewers and that Texas receiving core to see how much they'll miss those guys from last year.
Well, will it be Quinn Ewers though, Stephen? I mean, if you're here's a more anonymous coach comments. If you're looking for a weak spot, maybe it's the fact you have the most famous name in quarterback history, Arch Manning, as a backup. But that's a problem any staff would take. They continue on different comment here. They instantly compare to the top programs in the league in terms of depth and talent, and could definitely win the conference and be headed back to the playoffs. So I kid there, Stephen. But again, for some reason, I mean, Arch Manning's not even taking a snap of significance, yet this guy we got on the screen here, Quinn Ewers, won the Big 12, led his team to the playoff, whooped Alabama's ass in Tuscaloosa. Yet we're still having to mention that Arch Manning's a backup, and it's going to be that way. And who knows, Stephen? I mean, if they lose to Oklahoma, if they lose to Georgia, back-to-back losses. Oh my God, we have got to insert Arch Manning to fix this program. I mean, those are the comments that are going to be made if Quinn Ewers struggles at all. It's going to be turned to Arch, I would think.
Yeah, I mean that. I guess in a way that if you're a Texas fan, and the biggest question mark could be how do you manage the Arch Manning Quinn Ewers dynamic this year? I guess that's probably a good thing, because you look at the team overall, like there's a really solid foundation across the board from the team that made the playoff and not a ton of glaring weaknesses. But you do kind of look at their schedule and you kind of wonder, okay, what happens if they struggle at Michigan? What happens if they struggle against Oklahoma or Georgia? Do they get Arch Manning in that final stretch of the season, as they kind of have a chance to stay in the college football playoff race? So it's funny how Quinn Ewers is one of the front runners to win the Heisman Trophy this year, and yet, I mean, all the focus is probably going to be on Arch Manning and seeing what happens with his playing time and how effective he is, and the first boos that come out for Ewers at the first interception this year.
All right. Man, one we've not yet gotten to, Stephen. That man, this is obviously one of the teams of the offseason here. Surprised we haven't got a Ole Miss donation here, but. Where are we at here? Maybe I've not uploaded it. That's why we don't have. Well, I guess we'll do Mississippi State first. All right, Mississippi State. Anonymous comments here, Stephen.
Mike, I think your Ole Miss graphics entered the transfer portal there.
Good one. All right, Jeff Lebby is going to give them a kind of Lane Kiffin energy, and obviously a similar offense, and he's going to attack recruiting skill position guys. The biggest question in Starkville is how serious are they going to get in NIL? Their expectation is to keep up with Ole Miss, but right now it's not even close in recruiting. And man, if I'm a Mississippi State fan, this is burning me up because this is two comments here, and somehow we managed to rope in Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss into both of them. But that's probably life as a State fan. In the state of Mississippi right now, you got to hear all this garbage about the Portal King and this, that, and the other. But fair questions here. I think that how not how committed, but just can Mississippi State compete at a high level in this era? I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, I do too. The first thing that kind of comes to mind as I'm reading these comments, like if I'm Jeff Lebby in Mississippi State, this is it's interesting. Obviously, you want higher expectations, but they're kind of flying under the radar. On one hand, Ole Miss has got expectations of making the playoff. They've got all these big time transfer additions. All of the expectations are, and spotlight is on Ole Miss. So if you're Mississippi State stepping into the situation with Jeff Lebby, it is kind of a year zero where you're starting from scratch. You're trying to get the foundation set for 2025 and beyond. Like this is something that you can sell playing time, you can sell an exciting offense, and also you can sell to your fans for NIL donations. Like, do we really want Ole Miss winning 10 games and going to the college football playoff every year? So I think maybe to some extent, if I'm Mississippi State, the success of Ole Miss provides a path and a foundation of how to turn things around by dipping into the portal heavily, which they've done, and also being very competitive in NIL, which Mississippi State will need to be if they're going to try and catch up.
Right. Nothing. I mean, just look at Ohio State.
Yeah,
because Michigan won last year. So,
yeah.
Same thing can be said here. But let's go part two. Again, this is Mississippi State fans are not going to be thrilled with these comments here, Stephen. But this is about Zach Arnett and the relationship with former head coach, of course, Zach Arnett, and the university was strained from the start. It wasn't a great fit for a first-time head coaching job, and the circumstances around Mike Leach's tragic passing made it tough for everyone. I don't think anyone is at fault there. It just wasn't going to work out, so they moved fast. And again, I've credited them this all offseason, Stephen, because the worst thing you can do other than make a bad hire is keep a bad hire and hope things change. In this ultra competitive SEC, if you made a mistake, it's better to just cut bait and correct it. And even if it affects you, may negatively affect you in the interim, but probably not, because I could imagine Mississippi State being any worse than they were last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think credit to AD Selman there because it just wasn't working out. And even though that Arnett was just a first year coach and probably didn't have a fair shot at building a program there, it clearly wasn't working out, and especially not on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, that Mississippi State had a team last year of a solid core that should at least made a bowl game last year, and so they did not. He did not manage anything right from taking over the program to last season. So it was time for change and a fresh start. So I think Mississippi State made the right call. It's tough to get rid of a first year coach because it's kind of a weird look, but at the same time, it clearly wasn't working out. So just go ahead and move on. That was clearly the right thing for Mississippi State to do.
All right, Stephen, I have retrieved these from the transfer portal. But we got comments for Ole Miss here, again, via the Athlon Sports College Football Preview Magazine Anonymous Coach section. If they can make it to Atlanta, of course, they're talking about the SEC Championship, and go to the playoff, it will be the success story of the portal era. I think it takes a certain kind of personality to manage a portal culture on your roster, and Lane Kiffin has it where someone like Jimbo Fisher does not. Oh, baby, did Lane make these comments on himself? It kind of feels like it with this one, but yeah, I've said this too. Again, the off season, trying to do a show every day. I probably just repeat myself here, Stephen. But I think it's interesting that yes, there's going to be expectations on Ole Miss like they never have before, given the roster, given the schedule. This should be one of the better teams in college football. I think I'm not going to call them a lock for the playoff, but damn near a lock. Particularly if they can beat LSU or Georgia, they're I don't care what the rest of it is. Put them in there. But I think you could also argue that Lane Kiffin's got a ton of pressure. And if he doesn't get it done here, then will he ever? I mean, I call him Lane Whiffin for a reason. He loses all these big games, and they only got a couple this year, and he's got more talent than he's ever had in his life. If they don't win big this year, then I'm not ready to call Lane Kiffin an elite coach.
Yeah, it's almost like if it doesn't happen now, when is it going to happen for Ole Miss? Because you have one of the nation's most explosive offenses, and you have a defense that should be better this season, just almost by default of the second year of Pete Golding, but also what they brought in through the portal. I mean, they picked up Chris Hardy, a pass rusher from Jacksonville State, who's just may end up only playing situationally this year, but he caused all kinds of havoc at Jacksonville State. He could be kind of another addition to a much improved defensive line. So, I mean, they have won double-digit games in 2 out of the last 3 years. So they have been really, really close. Like, it feels, I don't want to say like the last dance type thing for the Chicago, like the Bulls, and like now we're trying to guess like who's Rodman on this team, right? And who's going to be Jordan. But it does feel like if it doesn't happen now for Ole Miss, given the core, given where they are in their career, they're probably not going to get back to this point in 2025. And the schedule is really favorable. And I think maybe the credit here, Kiffin has navigated the portal well. And like I said, the win total's been there the last 2 years. They just need to be there in that 10-11 win conversation again. They've done it, and they arguably have a better roster this year than they did last year. So I think that's a good sign for Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm. And then one more on Ole Miss here. Coach comments, anonymous comments here. Offensively, they're absolutely stacked. Defensively, they're better year over year with Pete Golding coming in. The real change that NIL and the portal created for them is the front seven talent. Are they Georgia? Are they Texas? Probably not. They don't have the kind of developmental system those elite programs have. The experiment they're running is, can you rent one? And that's a fascinating thing to look at, Stephen. I mean, all throughout this portal NIL era, I've been told you cannot build a roster the way Lane Kiffin is doing it, yet he does it year after year. Now, obviously, everything we just said, this will be their true test this year. But, yeah, I mean, if Ole Miss wins big, the rest of the country is going to see this as a blueprint. And not that they're all going to be able to pull it off, but I think it opens the window for a lot of teams, if they have the right situation, they have the right players on the roster coming back, to add players via the portal and hopefully some surprise teams that 5 years ago had no business winning at an elite level in college football have that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the one thing, I guess, well, the two things that the expanded playoff can do for you is that the transfer portal allows you to get better and get better in a hurry. And also the playoff allows you for a little bit margin of error, and also allows you to those teams that were sort of just on the outside, especially the New Year's Six Bowl where Ole Miss has kind of been. It allows you that chance. If you could just get a little bit better, you're in the college football playoff. Now, I do think if I was building a roster, I don't want to sound like Dabo Swinney or anything, but I do think you want to build like the high school ranks and supplement to the transfer portal, kind of like Georgia, kind of like Texas has been. But I think where Ole Miss is, they kind of live in this space of you can't out recruit Georgia, you can't out recruit Texas and Alabama. So what do? Which is you sort of develop some guys at home, you find the right quarterback, and you build the pieces through the puzzle from the portal, and that gets you in that mix. So this is kind of the right roster construction for Ole Miss, and you can see some teams in the same tier doing the same thing in the coming years.
Yeah. All right, Stephen, best for the last here. Tennessee Vols. Look at this face hype. How did no volunteer make a donation here? But it's worth it if you stuck around for it. Here's the anonymous coach comments on Tennessee. The staff thinks Nico will be the best quarterback they've had in the system. And when they have a quarterback they're confident in, they're as good as anybody on that side of the football. The question is going to be what they put around him this season. They don't have the elite wideout or obvious target, but the Tulane transfer, Chris Brazzell, is pretty decent. So, interesting, Stephen. If Nico, I mean, my goodness, people thought I was hyping him up all offseason. It sounds like these anonymous coaches are. But the fact that, if he can live up to this incredible hype, Tennessee could be that team that that surprises the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, that picture of Josh Heupel was what the face that he was making when he saw Cousin Shane donate money for Vanderbilt. He's like, "Come on, man." I think this kind of gets at what you and I have been talking about this offseason, which is, everything points to Nico breaking out in a big way for Tennessee. And, Josh Heupel's offense last season was at the bottom, close to the bottom of the SEC in SEC games in terms of production. And now you are upgrading probably fairly significantly at quarterback to go with one of the SEC's better offensive lines and better receiving cores. There's really the potential for this offense to take off. So all kind of the eggs are in Nico's basket. And certainly I think as we feel, and I think opposing coaches feel, that it's really going to click for Tennessee this season. So no surprise there. And I also like Chris Brazzell, the Tulane transfer. I think he's going to have a nice year for the Vols. I don't know if Tennessee maybe has an All-American receiver, but if you get Brew McCoy healthy to go with Squirrel White, to go with some of the young weapons plus Brazzell, this receiving core is in a good spot coming into 2024.
Mm-hmm. And then final comment here. Again, we got two for every team here. Josh Heupel, Tennessee, anonymous coach comments. Defensively, they're not at the level of the national title caliber programs in this league, but they're better than when Josh Heupel took over. The floor is higher here, but they have question marks in the secondary. Put them right outside the playoff contenders for now, but the quarterback could really be really special. And again, oh, buddy. I mean, hype upon hype upon hype for Nico heading into his first year as a starting quarterback at Tennessee. But all indications are they're going to be able to use the middle of the field more often than they were able to under Joe Milton. They got incredible. I don't, again, kind of like they're saying, they don't have that Jalen Hyatt type receiver, but I think this is the best collection of receivers that they're going to have on the Josh Heupel era. Potentially, this could be the best offensive line, and not that offensive line has been a weakness at all for them at all. But I think this is going to be the best one they've had. I think Dylan Sampson could be a breakout star in the SEC. A lot of ifs, I get it, but again, I'm just telling y'all. I know I'm biased, but I think Tennessee is poised to be a team that, more like they were 2 years ago when they would have made the playoff in an expanded era.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think when I start thinking about playoff contenders, I think you can kind of break them up into tiers a little bit, because you can always say that teams that are ultra talented, these are your Georgias, your Ohio State, they're going to be playoff contenders year in and year out. You're going to have teams that are kind of like Michigan to some extent, where over 3 or 4 years they developed that core, made some solid kind of pickups in the portal to supplement some of their pieces, but also every year we see a team that has a quarterback kind of take off, and that ends up shooting that team up the rankings. And I think that team this year could be Tennessee. I think Oklahoma under Jackson Arnold, Connor Wigman at A&M, like those are 3 of your breakout quarterbacks in the country this season. So it's hard to argue with that first comment too. Like, I do think Tennessee's defense kind of lags compared to some of the other contenders in the league, and especially in the secondary. That's really the biggest weakness I continue to believe that this team has. But that being said, they could score 30, 40 points every week, and you have to just simply outscore Tennessee to do so. And they could be in a lot of high scoring games. And in that case, Tennessee's probably going to end up on the winning side of many of those.
Mm-hmm. All right, Steven. So, man, really long show here. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I feel bad. I feel like I'm pushing you to the brink of exhaustion talking about these teams. So, any closing thoughts on the anonymous coach comments here before we wrap up?
Mike, I think it is one of my favorite pieces we get in the magazine every year. I enjoy reading the perspective of coaches, even if we don't agree with it. I find the information to be interesting. I think it also confirms some things we were thinking coming into the year, also makes you sort of think through some of the things maybe you were doubting. So a lot of interesting intel. But next week, June 4th, the magazine hits newsstands, so not much longer. The complete magazine will be out there for everybody to check out.
Yeah, and so I can't thank you enough, Steven, for the show topic, the show content, the show idea, all the hard work you're doing to give all the cousins out there all this valuable information that they're not getting anywhere else, at least not until you get that Athlon Sports College Football Preview magazine in your hands. But again, I can't thank you enough. And before you go, as always, can you tell the audience how can they find your stuff online and how can they follow you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Steven. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Steven L. CFB, all CFB 365. At athlonsports.com, and also the Cover 2 podcast every week, talking all things college football.
All right, Steven. So thanks again for all the hard work you do. Thanks each and every one of you for hanging out, especially on this long edition of the show. We truly, truly do appreciate it. And we got more content coming throughout the week. But that's going to do it for this episode. We'll catch you on the next one.